The morning fog rolled across San Francisco's financial district as Layla Mansouri adjusted her headset and glanced at her watch. 7:30 a.m. meant her clients in Dubai were already deep into their business day, and she had 3 conference calls lined up before most of her American colleagues even arrived at the office. Her corner cubicle at Sterling Global Solutions was modest, but the view of the Bay Bridge reminded her daily of how far she'd come since arriving from Lebanon 15 years ago. She pulled up the quarterly reports for the Al Rashid Group, her largest client, and began reviewing the numbers that would determine whether their multi-million-dollar expansion deal would proceed. "Layla, you're early again," called Marcus from the neighboring cubicle, settling down with his coffee. She smiled and waved, then returned her attention to the spreadsheet. The numbers told a story of steady growth, but she knew from her conversations with Ahmad al-Rashid that the real concerns weren't visible in the data. Cultural nuances, family dynamics, and regional politics all played roles in business decisions that her American colleagues rarely understood. She'd learned to navigate these complexities over years of building relationships, earning trust through countless late-night calls and patient explanations of American business practices to clients who spoke Arabic as their first language. Her phone buzzed with a text from her daughter, Sarah. "Good luck with the presentation today, Mom. You've got this." Layla smiled, remembering how Sarah had helped her practice her English pronunciation when she first started working in corporate America. Now her daughter was a sophomore at UC Berkeley, studying international business, inspired by watching her mother bridge 2 worlds. The irony wasn't lost on her that Sarah was learning in textbooks what Layla had mastered through lived experience. She straightened her blazer and opened her laptop, ready to tackle another day of making the impossible seem effortless. The office began filling with the usual morning rush of coffee-clutching executives and chattering account managers. Layla's first call was with the Zawawi Industries team in Muscat, and she switched effortlessly between English and Arabic as she explained the new compliance requirements that would affect their manufacturing partnership. Her colleagues often marveled at her ability to switch languages mid-sentence, but for Layla, it was as natural as breathing. She'd grown up trilingual, speaking Arabic at home, French at school, and English in the international community of Beirut. These skills had become her professional superpower, though she sometimes felt invisible in a company that celebrated flashy presentations over quiet competence. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning, innocuous enough in its corporate speak, but Layla felt her stomach drop as she read the subject line: "Organizational restructuring, team meeting at 2 p.m. She'd been through enough layoffs in her career to recognize the signs. The whispered conversations between managers, the sudden appearance of HR representatives, the way her supervisor Jennifer had been avoiding eye contact all week. She closed her laptop and walked to the break room, needing a moment to process what she suspected was coming. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured coffee, the steam rising like the uncertainty clouding her thoughts. "Did you get the meeting invite?" Marcus appeared beside her, his usual cheerful demeanor replaced by concern. They'd started at Sterling the same year, had weathered budget cuts and management changes together. Layla nodded, unable to trust her voice. She thought about the mortgage payment due next week, Sarah's tuition bill, and the medical expenses for her mother's recent surgery. At 52, starting over felt daunting, but she'd reinvented herself before. The conference room filled with nervous energy as 23 employees filed in, their faces reflecting the same mixture of dread and resignation that Layla felt. Jennifer stood at the head of the table, flanked by HR Director Patricia Williams and a man Layla didn't recognize. "I know this is difficult," Jennifer began, her voice carefully modulated in that tone managers used when delivering bad news. "Due to budget constraints and our need to streamline operations, we're eliminating several positions effective immediately." The room fell silent, except for the hum of the air conditioning. Layla found herself studying the faces around the table, wondering who else would be walking out today. The man she didn't recognize turned out to be from the external consulting firm that had been analyzing their department's efficiency for months. "The following employees will be transitioning out of the company," Jennifer continued, reading from a prepared statement. When she heard her own name, Layla felt a strange sense of relief mixed with anger. Relief that the uncertainty was over. Anger that 15 years of dedication could be reduced to a line item on a budget spreadsheet. She thought about Ahmad al-Rashid's call yesterday, expressing concerns about the new trade regulations. She thought about the delicate negotiations with the Moroccan Textile Consortium that had taken months to arrange. She thought about the cultural bridges she'd built, the trust she'd earned, the relationships that couldn't be easily transferred to someone else's portfolio. The security guard escorted her to her desk with practiced efficiency, watching as she packed 15 years of her professional life into 2 cardboard boxes. Photos of Sarah's graduation, a small Arabic calligraphy piece that read "Perseverance," and the business cards of clients who had become friends over the years. Her replacement, a recent MBA graduate named Trevor, had already been introduced to the team. He seemed competent enough, with impressive credentials and the kind of confidence that came from never having to prove himself in a second language. She wondered if anyone had told him about the nuances of Middle Eastern business culture, or if they assumed Google Translate would suffice. "I'm sorry, Layla," Jennifer said, appearing at her cubicle with the mandatory exit paperwork. "You know this isn't personal." The consulting firm identified redundancies, and with Trevor's background in international finance. Her voice trailed off as she realized how hollow the explanation sounded. Layla signed the papers mechanically, her mind already shifting to practical concerns. She had some savings, enough to cover a few months of expenses, but the job market for someone her age was notoriously difficult. She'd heard the stories from other displaced workers, the months of interviews that led nowhere, the age discrimination that no one would admit to, but everyone knew existed. The drive home through San Francisco's afternoon traffic gave her time to think. Her phone had been buzzing with messages from colleagues expressing sympathy and outrage, but she'd turned it off. She needed silence to process what had happened and plan her next move. Sarah called as she pulled into her driveway, having heard the news through the company grapevine. "Mom, I'm so sorry. This is completely unfair." Layla appreciated her daughter's anger on her behalf, but she found herself feeling oddly calm. She'd survived worse upheavals in her life, leaving Lebanon during the Civil War, rebuilding her career from scratch, raising a daughter alone after her divorce. That evening, she sat in her small garden with a cup of tea, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. Her phone rang. Ahmad al-Rashid's number appeared on the screen. She hesitated, then answered. "Layla, Habibi, I've been trying to reach you all day. We need to discuss the contract modifications before tomorrow's deadline." His voice carried the warmth and respect she'd grown accustomed to over their 8-year business relationship. She took a deep breath and explained that she was no longer with Sterling Global Solutions. The silence that followed spoke volumes about the chaos that was about to unfold. 3 days after her departure, Layla's phone began ringing incessantly. First, it was Marcus, whispering from the office bathroom. "It's a disaster here. The Zawawi deal is falling apart because Trevor can't communicate with their legal team. They only speak Arabic, and he's been trying to use Google Translate." She almost laughed at the absurdity. Complex international contracts weren't the place for automated translation, especially when cultural context mattered as much as legal terminology. She'd spent years learning the subtle differences between formal business Arabic and the colloquial expressions that built rapport with clients. The second call came from a panicked Trevor himself. "Ms. Mansouri, I hope you don't mind me calling directly. I'm having some difficulties with the Al-Rashid Group presentation. Could you possibly walk me through their preferred communication style?" His MBA confidence had evaporated, replaced by the desperation of someone drowning in unfamiliar waters. She listened politely as he described missing deadlines, confused clients, and mounting pressure from management. Part of her wanted to help. She'd never been vindictive by nature. But another part recognized that her expertise had value that Sterling had failed to appreciate. Jennifer's call came on Friday afternoon, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Layla, I know this is awkward, but we're having some transition issues. The Middle Eastern accounts are complicated. I was wondering if you might consider a consulting arrangement to help us through this rough patch. Through the phone, she could hear the chaos in the background, raised voices, ringing phones, the sound of a company in crisis. She asked about the specific problems they were facing, and Jennifer's list was extensive. Missed conference calls due to time zone confusion, cultural missteps that had offended key clients, and contractual disputes arising from mistranslations. I appreciate you reaching out, Layla said carefully, but I'm afraid I'm not available for consulting work right now. It was true. She'd spent the week networking, updating her resume, and reaching out to former colleagues. 3 potential opportunities had already emerged, including one with a boutique consulting firm that specialized in Middle Eastern markets. They'd been impressed by her track record and client relationships, offering her a partnership track and equity stake. The contrast with Sterling's penny-pinching mentality was stark. She hung up and looked at her calendar, noting the lunch meeting she had scheduled with her potential new partners. Sometimes the best revenge was simply moving forward. 6 months later, Layla stood in her new office overlooking Montgomery Street, the brass nameplate on her door reading, Layla Mansouri, Senior Partner. Her consulting firm, Bridge International, had grown from 3 to 15 employees, with Layla leading their Middle Eastern division. The irony wasn't lost on her that she now charged Sterling Global Solutions competitors 3 times her former salary for the same expertise they'd discarded. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Saw the article about your promotion in the Business Journal. So proud of you, Mom. The accompanying photo showed her shaking hands with the CEO of a major tech company, announcing a new partnership to expand into Gulf markets. Ahmad al-Rashid had followed her to Bridge International, along with 6 other major clients who valued relationships over corporate bureaucracy. You were the reason we stayed with Sterling for so long, he'd told her during their first meeting at her new firm. When you left, the trust left with you. The cultural bridge she'd built over 15 years couldn't be replicated by someone reading from a script or relying on translation software. Trust was earned through consistency, cultural understanding, and the kind of personal connection that took years to develop. The morning news played in the background as she reviewed contracts for 3 new clients. The business reporter mentioned Sterling Global Solutions' recent financial troubles, including the loss of their entire Middle Eastern portfolio and subsequent layoffs. She felt no satisfaction in their struggles, only a quiet vindication that her work had been more valuable than they'd recognized. Her assistant knocked and entered with her schedule for the day: 2 client calls, a strategy meeting with her partners, and lunch with a headhunter who was trying to poach her for a Fortune 500 company. The offers kept coming, but she was content building something of her own. Her phone rang, an unknown number with a San Francisco area code. She answered to find Jennifer's voice, more humble than she'd ever heard it. Layla, I know I have no right to ask, but Sterling is considering bankruptcy. The board is looking for someone with your expertise to help us rebuild our international division. We're prepared to offer you a vice president position, full equity package, and complete autonomy over hiring decisions. The silence stretched between them as Layla considered her response. She looked out at the city skyline, thinking about the journey that had brought her here, the doors that had closed and the ones that had opened. Jennifer, she said finally, her voice warm but firm. I appreciate the offer, but I'm exactly where I need to be. Sometimes when something falls apart, it's because it was never built to last in the first place. She hung up and turned back to her computer, where an email waited from a potential client in Saudi Arabia. The subject line was in Arabic: seeking a partner who understands. She smiled and began typing her response, once again building bridges between worlds, but this time on her own terms. The glue that held everything together wasn't just her language skills. It was the relationships, trust, and cultural understanding that couldn't be outsourced or replaced. They'd learned that lesson too late, but she'd learned something even more valuable. Her worth wasn't determined by those who failed to recognize it.